Current Affairs. This is Akashvani. In the weekly program Current Affairs, now we bring you a discussion on key bills passed in Monsoon Session in Parliament. The participants are Sandeep Phukan and Aditi Tandon, senior journalists. Moderator is Sonu Sud.
The Monsoon Session of Parliament, which began on 20th July, concluded yesterday. There were 19 sittings spread over 25 days, and despite the productivity of 19% in Lok Sabha and 39% in Rajya Sabha, due to repeated disruptions, key bills were passed which pertain to reforming various critical ecosystems of our country, like public examinations, mines and minerals, MSMEs, cooperatives, taxation, and tribunals, to name a few. In all, 12 bills were passed by both houses of Parliament. And to tell us more about the significance of these bills and how these legislations will benefit the country in its journey towards Viksit Bharat by 2047, we have with us two senior journalists on the show, Sandeep Phukan and Aditi Tandon. Warm welcome, Sandeep ji, Aditi ji, to Akashvani Studios.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll start with you, Sandeep ji. Union Minister Kiran Rijiju, he said that the low productivity in Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha was regrettable, though the monsoon session was successful from legislative business point of view, and 12 key bills were passed. Now, I would like to know from you as an expert, according to you, is the most important bill which was passed in the monsoon session?
To my mind, given the context that this monsoon session happened when there was student protest just outside the parliament over the NEET paper leak, we must remember that the government took several steps outside the parliament, but then eventually they brought in a bill called the Public Examination Prevention of Unfair Means Amendment Bill. This was actually a 2024 law, which was brought in with some amendments to make more stringent provisions against paper leak, higher punishment up to 10 years, higher monetary compensation or penalty on people who are involved in paper leaks, all kinds of things, setting up of fast-track courts with a specific deadline of completing the investigation within 2 months, and the entire trial process should be completed in 3 months. So these are very important aspects that were brought in as amendments to the 2024 law. So to my mind, this, of course, would be, given the context of this session and the washout, this would be perhaps the most important bill in my mind.
Yes.
Then the other very important bill, that Prevention of Insults to National Honour Amendment Bill. So essentially, the bill has been extended to cover the national song, Vande Mataram. And now, if somebody is intentionally preventing its singing or disrupting an assembly singing, then it becomes a criminal offence. Of course, there are issues raised by the opposition parties as to how does one define what is an insult, who will define and who will sort of adjudicate on these issues. But essentially, this makes, as I said, intentionally preventing its singing, that is singing of Vande Mataram, disrupting an assembly, singing it, a criminal offence.
So coming to you, Aditi ji, as Sandeep ji said that the Public Examinations Prevention of Unfair Means Amendment Bill 2026 was a very important legislation which was cleared in this monsoon session. How do you think it's going to, benefit and increase the credibility and integrity of our public examination system? What, according to you, are the key provisions?
This bill is very important as far as deterrence to the crime of paper leaks is concerned. This bill enhances the penalties very significantly. There are two classes that have been defined in the bill. One is the individual category. For instance, if you are found leaking a paper, suppose you are an examiner and you have been hired by the system to set an exam and you are found complicit in the crime of leaking that paper, the punishments have been significantly enhanced, both financial as well as imprisonment. Second category is the organized crime, where there are syndicates. We all know that paper leak is not a new phenomenon. It has bothered and worried all governments in the past. I still remember a major paper leak that happened in 2011, which was the All India Engineering Entrance Examination, which was actually the cornerstone after which the debate started around what to do with the examination system. At that time, there was the Congress-led UPA government, and they started the whole debate. And that debate ultimately culminated in the establishment of the National Testing Agency. See, any law to evolve and to get perfected has to learn from the gaps that exist in the system. The bill that we just saw the Parliament pass fills a lot of such gaps. But ultimately, it's about deterrence. What I would like to add here is that while deterrence is very important, that's only the second step of the crime. The first step is the crime itself. So prevention of crime is to be done through the deterrence of crime. So parliamentarians rose to the occasion. They identified themselves with the sentiments of the agitating students, which was, very, very important at that time, because this was a very genuine concern. And it was important that political leaders across the political spectrum supported this bill and ensured that, the punishment is enhanced so that everybody who's caught in this web and in this crime is sent out a strong signal, like the Prime Minister said in his selfie video, that there will be zero tolerance for paper leaks in future.
Absolutely. And in fact, they have widened the scope of accountability also to service providers who are playing a major role in the conduct of such examinations at such a scale.
Yeah, in fact, I think that's a very important addition which you mentioned, Sonu, that extension of the culpability of the crime to service providers is something new that has not been there in the 2024 version of the law. Like Sandeep pointed out, that it's the amendment to an old law and you are strengthening the existing systems. But what we must also remember is that this is the first time in the history of the country that a dedicated law to prevent paper leaks has actually been earlier passed and now strengthened. This has never happened. I think this is a solid signal of the political will to ensure that there is absolutely no tolerance for the syndicates that are growing and flourishing and actually, helping students take shortcuts to success at the cost of meritorious students.
So as Mr. Phukan also pointed out, that time-bound investigation, time-bound day-to-day trials, that's a very important aspect that has been introduced.
See, two things that the law says. In fact, I'd say three things. First, of course, they are saying that every state government will be empowered to set up special task forces in order to investigate the crime of paper leaks. Central government will be equally entitled to set up such a task force. Second thing they've said is appointment of dedicated special public prosecutors. So, no, the problem is not dearth of law. The problem is lack of infrastructure and dedicated focus to solve a certain crime. You do not have dedicated fast-track courts, as this law has now provided to deal with paper leaks for a large number of crimes in this country. For instance, you have dedicated fast-track courts to try POCSO cases, because that's the signal again that the government wants to give is zero tolerance for sexual crimes against children. So you've set up a dedicated legal infrastructure to ensure that justice is quickly dispensed with. That is the exact intention behind this particular bill. Like you said, the special task forces will be set up, dedicated fast-track courts will be set up. Many high courts have already given those orders. For instance, Delhi, Madhya Pradesh, Bombay. Then the third thing is that you have to complete the trial within 3 months of the filing of the charge sheet. The task force has to complete the investigation within 2 years. But how do they do that? To do that, what is important is that the state governments where their jurisdiction exists and the center where its jurisdiction exists exactly sets up, well-empowered infrastructure systems. For instance, you have to appoint public prosecutors, you have to appoint lawyers. Then only the investigation can be done in time. You have to dedicate police team like a special task force and equip it properly.
Sandeep ji, we move on to the next important bill. 31% of GDP, more than 40 crore workers engaged, and nearly 50% contribution to exports. The Indian micro, small and medium enterprises sector is definitely, rightly considered the backbone of the Indian economy. How do you see the MSME Development Amendment Bill 2026, resolving delayed payments and tightening dispute resolution timelines and decriminalizing minor offences? How do you think this is going to strengthen the MSME ecosystem of the country? How important is this?
As you rightly said, I would just borrow your words. This sector is really the backbone of the economy. You have MSMEs both in the formal and informal sector. So first thing that this bill does, we have a large number of MSMEs for various reasons, for because sometimes when you register, then you have to also follow the labor laws and those issues. So for many reasons, people also work in these industries like an informal sector, like the informal part of the economy. So
Right.
first thing that this bill does is that it provides a national digital platform where for free, they can voluntarily register. So free and voluntary registration of MSME, that's one very important thing. The other very important part of this bill is that it seeks to provide a faster resolution of delayed payment disputes. Because, eventually for any industry to succeed, you have to ensure that the money keeps flowing and then your business does not get stuck in payment-related disputes. So this bill seeks to provide a mechanism for faster resolution of such delayed payment disputes. Also seeks to provide better access to finance. So that's one part of it. The other part is that sometimes, it's not for the want of willingness, but sometimes you're unaware. Though in law, ignorance of law is no defense. But sometimes people are unaware that you are supposed to do this or you're supposed to do that. So those smaller violations, minor violations, they have been replaced, with some graded penalty system, including just giving you a warning for the first time. You were
Yes.
supposed to, let's say, register your electricity load. I'm just giving you an example, and you did not do that. And it may be just that you didn't know you're supposed to do it. So the current provisions may actually ensure that your industry is shut down or you keep making trips to the court. So in some cases of minor violation, this bill will actually let you off with just a warning. So that's the idea. So the idea is sort of fits into this approach or philosophy of ease of doing business. And as I said, that this is the most important sector for the government and for the economy in terms of generating employment.
Aditi, what would you say, the MSME Development Amendment Bill 2026, this constant dynamic approach of the government where they are updating the provisions relating to these very critical sectors of the economy, how important is this?
It is very important to decriminalize a number of provisions that exist in the bill that you have just mentioned and in the sector that you've just mentioned. Why is this bill important? I think the context of this particular law has to be kept in mind. For instance, historically, if you look at which countries, Sonu, have progressed the most, these are the countries that have given a focused attention to the manufacturing sector. India, the service sector is currently contributing, I think, 64% of the GDP, as against the manufacturing sector, which is contributing about 12 to 13%. The idea is to take this 12 to 13% to 23% shortly. So how do you do that? You do that by easing business. How do these medium and small enterprises ensure their fullest potential? And why is this being done is because manufacturing has been seen to be the cornerstone of economic transformation in most of the countries. For example, 19th century Britain was transformed into an economic powerhouse through manufacturing. Same is the case with East Asia in the 21st century. So India is lagging on the manufacturing front, and we have seen Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman repeatedly mention that the share of manufacturing in the GDP of the country has to be increased from 12 to 23% over the next 2 decades. And that is very important for the Viksit Bharat goal, and it's very important to take India's economy to $5 trillion US. How do you do that? You have the gig economy flourishing. You already have a very strong service sector. So where there is a skew, you empower and you enable that particular sector to realize its fullest potential. How do you do that? You do that by boarding what, Prime Minister Modi repeatedly calls the Reform Express.
Absolutely.
So this bill is about reforms in the sector. And you also know, Sonu, that 14 sunrise industries have been identified for growth in India, as we all know. One of them being semiconductors, the other being the battery storage sector. Then also leather and textiles is one of those sectors. So the MSME sector is going to be handheld to basically flourish in the coming days. This bill will aid that growth.
Another very important bill which was passed, in fact, yesterday only, Mines and Minerals Development and Regulation Amendment Bill. How do you see this in view of the fact that critical and strategic minerals, they are very important for so many key sectors of our economy? So what will this bill seek to do? And when it is implemented, and how will it impact the overall mining sector of the country? And how do you see this whole of government approach?
See, this is a very consequential bill, and no doubt that this particular bill, if it is converted into a law, presidential assent is awaited, and we all know that the opposition states have sounded some concern, which I'm sure will be gradually taken on board. What this bill essentially does is, it first of all sends a signal that mines and minerals are a national resource. Right now, what is happening, that in general perception, you see, we are a federal structure and state governments obviously have their rights. State governments will be agitated, especially mineral-rich states. For example, we have Odisha, which is BJP ruled, then we have Jharkhand, which is JMM ruled. So it's not about which party is ruling which state. Any state will not be willing or happy to forego their rights of taxation, for instance, on mines and mineral sector. But what has been the government's viewpoint and the government's argument in passing this bill is that the fiscal burden that is being imposed on mines and minerals through the state governments, there is no uniform taxation happening, Sonu.
Right.
What is happening is, even after mining operations have started, a number of states continue to levy taxes, continue to impose, some kind of a cess, which is why a lot of mines get closed. Their operations only stop. And a lot of mining investments don't come in. Mining is not incentivized. So the larger goal that the government of India is saying behind the bill is basically to bring uniformity in the fiscal management of mines of the country, and to insert provisions that will now allow the center to basically lay down a proper guideline on as to how and when, at what stage of mining operation can taxes be imposed. And the bill also explicitly states that only through the guideline of the central government can taxes be imposed on mining operations. The idea behind this bill is that you unleash the mining extraction and mining development potential of this country. We all know that minerals are very important. There are critical minerals. Special focus through this law is on 6 critical minerals, Sonu. You have lithium, which is very important for electric vehicle sector,
Right.
batteries. Then, you have cobalt, nickel, you have granite, gold and silver. Right now, we are heavily dependent on imports.
Absolutely.
How do you become self-sufficient, Atmanirbhar? That's only possible when we start looking at minerals and mining operations from a holistic, whole of government, whole of state, whole of society approach. And state governments will also have to ultimately realize that minerals are not just a state resource, they are a finite resource. You have to mine them to capacity, you have to mine them effectively to align them to the national goals. Yes. And that's the purpose behind this bill. So I'm sure in this federal structure, the state governments and the central government will be able to find a meeting ground in the interest of the larger national goal of developed India.
And coming to you, Sandeep ji, what would you say about the Taxation and Other Laws Amendment Bill 2026, which was passed? How is it going to benefit the manufacturing of our electronics industry, of establishing the AI data center ecosystem in the country, and bringing in foreign capital?
I think, as Aditi said earlier, that this is again a reform bill with a very clear purpose, that the bill gives actually business greater flexibility, move to a concessional tax regime. Actually, it also sort of, for business trusts, it brings down the effective rate of taxes, from about 35% to about 28%. So, quite clearly, the idea is to bring about reforms. Certainly, as you rightly said, that it also seeks to remove certain tax-related impediments affecting global electronic and manufacturing supply chains. Yes. And that's really important. Of course, this has been a contentious issue. Though the finance minister clarified that it does not impose any additional tax on UPI transaction, I would say this has been the most contentious part of this bill.
Okay.
Where contentious part in the sense that it provides for that MDR, merchant discount rate, which is actually applicable to your debit cards and credit cards. So essentially, there is a cost to your UPI transaction, which was earlier not the case, which is completely free. Of course, the finance minister clarified in both the houses. In Rajya Sabha, I heard her reply where she said that in individual to individual cases, when you do transaction, there is actually no transaction cost at all. In terms of individual to merchant transaction, there is a transaction cost, but that cost will be borne by the merchant. Of course, the opposition's argument is that, the merchant will find a way effectively to pass on the increased costs of transaction to the consumer. So eventually the consumer has to pay. So this is one part of it. But as you said, that this is the digital part of it. But essentially, the overall idea of this legislation is to rationalize tax provisions,
Yes.
reduce tax friction, also make India an attractive destination for foreign investors, especially in electronic manufacturing area and in the electronic goods area and the supply chain there. Aditi was saying earlier that this is really one area, while our services sector is doing extremely well, I think really lagging behind if you compare to much smaller economies like Indonesia, Vietnam, for the textile sector, Bangladesh. So I think this is really one area where we should step up in terms of getting more and more investors to invest. And because more investments in these sectors also mean advancement of technology and more jobs.
Aditi, coming to you, as Sandeep ji said that the Taxation and Other Laws Amendment Bill is going to give a push to manufacturing, and we have a lot of potential to increase manufacturing in our country. So you think that the tax certainty which has and the tax concessions which have been offered, this will bring in foreign capital, and also the digital payment system, you think that provision which has been given, the enabling provision which has been given for implementation of merchant discount rate, which has not yet been implemented. You think that as the digital payment system expands and more technology is required to make it safe, secure, some of that expenditure needs to be recovered, and that too the FM clarified that it's not going to be levied on users, not on small merchants. So how do you see this?
Most of the part of the bill has been explained by Sandeep, so I will not repeat what he said. But what I would like to add is that there was a lot of concern around the UPI regime and what this bill might do to that landscape. So we must mention here, for the benefit of listeners, that Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, during her reply, had categorically stated that the legislation does not impose any tax on UPI, and the digital payment system will remain free for consumers. That has been clarified. Secondly, what she has said is that the UPI related amendment is only an enabling provision, like you just said, and it does not itself impose any tax or transaction charge on the users. So it's basically an enabler because the digital economy is now booming. Let's not forget that 50% of all digital transactions in the world are happening in our country. And the finance minister has also further said, with respect to the MDR charges, that the government does not intend to impose any MDR charges on small merchants, as they remain central to the UPI's inclusive growth. So this is just an enabling provision, like you also yourself said in the remarks.
Aditi, another very important bill which was passed was National Cooperative Development Corporation Amendment Bill. How important is this? How does this broaden the mandate of NCDC, the National Cooperative Development Corporation, and how does it strengthen the cooperative ecosystem of the country? What is the impact of this on our economy?
See, this is a very important bill insofar as the growth of the cooperative sector in the country is concerned. Sonu, we must remember that this government has placed a single-minded focus on the cooperative sector. Prime Minister and Home Minister both come from a state which has a very rich history of successful cooperative movements. Amul is the case study. Okay, now we have a Ministry of Cooperation that was set up in 2021. The NCDC Act, Amendment Act that you are mentioning, primarily what I understand as the most important feature of this bill is it does a lot of things. What it primarily does is that it allows the National Cooperative Development Corporation to fund entities that are supporting the growth of the cooperative sector directly. Okay. Right now what is happening is the NCDC cannot fund a lot of financial institutions that are hand-holding or investing in the cooperative sector directly. They have to go through the cooperative channel, like through a cooperative bank, or they have to go through the state government system, which leads to avoidable lags in the system and which also leads to needless, inertia in the system. Now this is a sector that is booming. And we all know the latest push that the government is giving, Sonu, is to blue economy, which is an upcoming sector, but it's an immensely strong sector potential-wise. For instance, the fisheries sector, There's a lot of focus on that. Fisheries can be an important part of the cooperative sector. So you have to basically remove the inflexibilities in the system and allow the NCDC, supporting and parallel infrastructure, which is important for the growth of the cooperative sector, because there are a number of institutions and organizations that want to invest in the sector. Okay. But then you have to be able to directly support them. I think that is a defining feature of this bill.
Coming to you, Sandeep ji, we would like your views on the importance and significance of the Tribunal Reforms Bill 2026. What is the importance of tribunals in our country? How do they lead to ease of doing business? And what is the implication of this bill?
See, in the tribunal system, this is actually part of our, alternate mechanism of this thing. Instead of going to court for every little thing, specific tribunals actually handle the issue at hand. So you have the Income Tax Appellate Tribunal. You have several other, Central Administrative Tribunal, CAT, for administrative matters relating to promotion or service matters of government employees. So now what this bill actually seeks to do is it sets up a National Tribunals Commission. It gives a structure. There are multiple tribunals working in different fields. Okay. So it wants to build that, the National Tribunal Commission will be based in New Delhi. The chairperson and members will actually give a proper structure. It seeks to streamline the appointment process so that there is no arbitrariness. There'll be proper guidelines as to what should be the criteria of appointment. So this is an extremely important bill in terms of, this is more like a streamlining. Tribunals anyways exist and function. But the idea brings all these tribunals under an umbrella body where you streamline its functioning, various tribunals, and you also provide a certain uniformity in terms of guidelines, in terms of appointments, in terms of functioning and structure. So that's the key difference between how tribunals functioned earlier and how the government envisages from here on.
Sandeep ji, if you could briefly tell us about the significance of Bankers' Books Evidence Bill 2026.
I would say is one of the most important bills. In very short, it expands the definition of banker's book to cover all kinds of physical, electronic, digital, even virtual and cloud-based records as legal evidence. So if you've done a transaction and should there be a dispute over some transaction, any electronic evidence of that transaction is evidence in a court of law. That's in short what this bill does, and it's a very important bill, keeping with the times.
Coming to you, Aditi, another important bill was Registration of Births and Deaths Amendment Bill 2026. How important do you think this bill is to prevent fraud and maintain database accurately?
See, registration of births and deaths in our country has historically been, a sector where governments have struggled, because generally the citizens are not very given to registrations. Now, this bill, what it does basically is it tells the citizens that if you do not register your birth or death within the first year of the occurrence of the event, it will become progressively difficult for you to get it done. For instance, for the second year, if you do it in the second year, you have to go to an executive magistrate. And if you do it in the year subsequent to the second year of the event of occurrence, then you have to go to the court of law, the judicial magistrate first class. So the basic message is that please get it done in the first year of occurrence itself.
Well, we are running out of time. Of course, the Supreme Court number of Judges Amendment Bill 2026 was also passed. The Kerala Alteration of Name Bill 2026 and the Appropriation Number 3 Bill 2026 were the other bills that were passed in this monsoon session. And it was a pleasure speaking to you, Aditi, and to you, Sandeep, on the significance and the impact on our nation, our country, and our development journey of these important legislations that have come.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
You are listening to a discussion on key bills passed in Monsoon Session of Parliament. The participants were Sandeep Phukan and Aditi Tandon, senior journalist. Moderator was Sonu Sud. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Akashvani. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may share your feedback about this program through email at airnsdtalks@gmail.com. or WhatsApp on 9289094044.
Current Affairs.